Rosalind Prescott set the blue-ribboned bonnet on the mahogany card table. Behind the withdrawing room doors, Juliana's circle had just shaved her head bare. Now the quadrille faltered beneath the chandeliers as the Duke of Whitmore left the line of ladies waiting for him to choose a bride and reached toward the pale straw. His gloved fingers touched the brim. "Do you wish me to hold this while you decide whether to stay or leave?" Rosalind took the bonnet back and gave him no smile to rescue the room. "The first decision of the evening will remain mine, Your Grace." Her old instinct arrived at once, joke about the cold air on her neck, make the violinists breathe again, let every staring lady pretend cruelty had become entertainment. Tonight she would not buy their comfort that way. The woman she served came through the crowd with a wool wrap raised toward Rosalind's head. Rosalind caught her wrist. "Not over my face," she said, "and not by the back stairs." Juliana Dunmore watched from the bride candidates with false astonishment. By then she had already given the room its excuse, a foolish game of forfeits, one lock of hair meant to be cut, and an accident Rosalind had supposedly made worse by losing her composure. It was the sort of lie respectable people preferred because believing it required nothing of them. The hostess turned to the Duke. "Your Grace, the opening set. We are waiting for your announcement. There will be no announcement tonight." He looked to Rosalind. "The anteroom or your carriage?" "The anteroom. My companion still needs her wrap." Rosalind saw departing guests snarl the carriage court. 3 coaches blocked the gates while a footman called names in arrival order. She opened the door. "Hold the westbound coach by the wall. Bring the 2 crescent carriages forward together. They share the road." The footman obeyed. Whitmore kept the impatient coachman from edging back into the way. Within minutes the knot loosened. Her employer arrived as the court began moving. That was not servitude, the Duke said. It was management, a generous name for shouting at coachmen. "My family gives a midsummer picnic in 5 weeks. I need someone to arrange the games, food, seating, and carriages. I would like to pay you for the commission." The next morning, Rosalind slid the blank back of a dance card across the table. "If the payment includes making Bath like me again, the price will be ruinous. Your reputation is not part of the commission." "Good. Mrs. Montague remains my employer and gives my reference. Your commission ends after the picnic and ball. No courtship is attached, no public mention of my hair. I decide the games and seating." He glanced at the sum. "I was about to offer more." "I know. That is why I object." He laughed, accepted Eleanor's ordinary rate, and returned the card. "Then I shall attempt something more difficult than generosity, Miss Prescott. I shall follow terms." Their first rehearsal took place 3 days later on a meadow beyond Bathwick, where canvas awnings, trestle tables, skittles, hoops, and hampers had been laid out beneath a windy June sky. Reginald, she had begun using his Christian name only in the privacy of her thoughts, stood on a low wooden box before 30 children and their families. This summer, he began, "We are not merely sharing food. We are reminding ourselves that a community may be made braver by hope, by fellowship, and by the willingness." Rosalind looked at the children. One boy had already found a hoop. Another was trying to see whether a skittle would float in a water bucket. A little girl stared with open devotion at the seed cake table. Rosalind tapped the side of the Duke's boot with the toe of her slipper. He stopped. "Your Grace," she said loud enough for the first rows to hear, "I believe the community's hope may improve if the cake survives long enough to be eaten." The adults laughed. Reginald looked at the children, looked at the cake, and folded the remainder of his speech in half. "Miss Prescott has reduced 6 minutes of moral instruction to 1 excellent argument. Games first. Cake immediately after." The children scattered. He stepped down beside her. There was a very fine sentence about fellowship coming next. "I am sure the cake would have treasured it. You are merciless. Only with speeches that stand between children and currants." His smile changed. It was not the broad public smile Bath expected of him, but something younger and easier. Rosalind felt answering warmth rise before she could manage it into anything useful. That unsettled her more than the laughter. He pointed toward the skittle lane. "You have shortened my speech. I claim compensation. Let me test the game." The moment he took his place, every child moved back. "Your Grace," first one boy said solemnly. Reginald's smile tightened. Rosalind saw it because she had spent years noticing exactly when a cheerful face became work. "If you yield the lane," he told them, "I shall have no game at all." No one moved. Rosalind considered the pins. New rule. The Duke bowls with his left hand and stands 2 paces farther back. Reginald turned. "By what authority?" "The authority you paid for." The first giggle came from the little girl who had been watching the cake. A boy rolled his wooden ball and knocked down 3 skittles. Reginald took his turn left-handed. His ball sailed magnificently into the grass. The children shouted with delight. For half a second, Bath's most admired man stared at the useless ball. Then he swept the victorious boy a bow so elaborate that the child nearly fell over laughing. Rosalind laughed too. No one had been hurt to purchase that laughter. No one had been made small for it. The sound came out of her without calculation, and Reginald looked up as if he had heard something he meant to remember. The work settled into a rhythm after that, though never a tidy one. In the second week, a hard wind came down from the hills and tore the decorative bunting Rosalind had ordered between the oaks. 3 lengths split before noon. She stood with the ruined cloth gathered over one arm, already measuring how many hours she could steal from sleep to mend it. "I can re-stitch the borders tonight," she said. "If I begin after supper, Reginald caught the loose end before the wind could drag it through the mud. Or we can stop asking the wind to admire our taste." She frowned at him. He borrowed a small knife from a gardener and cut 1 torn length into shorter strips. "Tie these to the hoops. They will move when the children throw." The markers were meant to remain still. "Then the children will have the pleasure of defeating both us and the weather." Rosalind should have resisted. Instead, she took the next strip and tied it herself. By afternoon, the bright ribbons fluttered from the hoops. The children adored them. They invented extra points for hitting a moving ribbon and complained when Rosalind tried to restore the original rule. Reginald leaned beside her against a trestle table. "I believe this proves my principle, that all damage should be rewarded, that joy occasionally has poor respect for a perfect plan." She looked at the torn cloth flashing in the wind. "Do not become unbearable merely because you are right once, too late." The following week, the meat pies arrived nearly an hour late for a luncheon trial. Servants, anxious to avoid offending titled guests, began carrying the first trays toward the largest canopy. Rosalind moved at once, redirecting 1 tray, then another, until she was hurrying between tables and doing the work of 3 people. Juliana Dunmore's voice drifted from beneath the canopy. "Miss Prescott certainly enjoys authority. One might almost think a duke standing nearby improves her appetite for giving orders." The old answer rose in Rosalind's mouth, bright and sharp enough to turn the insult into a joke. Before she used it, Reginald picked up his empty plate and walked to the end of the serving line behind the vicar and 2 tenant farmers. A few gentlemen stared. One sighed and followed him. Another, after a visible struggle with himself, did the same. Juliana's smile thinned. Rosalind let the joke die. "Serve by tables," she told the maid nearest her. "West side first, then east. No rank. Merely distance from the kitchen tent." The confusion cleared. Nobody applauded. Nobody needed to. Later, when she thanked Reginald, he shook his head. "You did not ask me to quarrel with Miss Dunmore." "No. And had I done so, you would have charged me an additional fee. An enormous one. I am learning. So slowly that it may yet become expensive." By the 4th week, one of the household clerks fell ill, and the carriage lists for the final ball threatened to swallow the dining table. Rosalind sat in Whitmore's library with the reverse of her once-empty dance card beside several sheets of names. She had used that blank card for timings, kitchen notes, game changers, and carriage reminders until its back looked like a battlefield of pencil marks. Eleanor sat near the open connecting doors with her sewing. Servants crossed the hall beyond. The proprieties remained visible, even if Rosalind's figures no longer did. She read Lord Hastings' name twice and placed him at the wrong gate twice. The mantel clock marked another quarter hour. Rosalind tightened her grip until the pencil pressed a red line into the side of her finger. "I am nearly finished," she said brightly. Reginald, who had been checking a separate list, looked at the crossings out rather than at her smile. "Give me the north gate." Rosalind's fingers tightened on the pencil. It was absurd. A carriage list was not her soul. Yet some frightened part of her believed that if another person could do her work, there would be less reason to keep her. Reginald drew a clean sheet toward himself. "Tell me what cannot be altered." She looked at Eleanor. Eleanor did not rescue her from the choice. "Elderly guests nearest the door," Rosalind said at last. "No more than 4 coaches in the turning court. Lord Hastings must not be placed beside Mr. Crawford unless you wish to hear about a boundary hedge until sunrise." Reginald nodded. "Anything else? Yes. Do not invent a speech for the coachman. That condition feels personal." "It is." She left the pencil on the table and went with Eleanor to supper. The next morning, the North Gate list was complete. Reginald had grouped the coaches differently than she would have. Every one of her conditions had been met. Rosalind stood over the paper for a long moment. Then she folded it and used it exactly as he had written it. That evening, after another rehearsal, Eleanor remained in the small drawing room adjoining the dining room, while Rosalind and Reginald ate a late plate of cold pie and cheese with the doors open between them. For 10 minutes they had agreed not to discuss the picnic. Rosalind lasted 3. "You should have seen Mr. Bell's face when I told him the cream had turned," she said. "He looked as if I had accused his cow of treason." Reginald smiled, but not quickly enough. Rosalind waited for the familiar impulse to work harder for his amusement. It came. She set it down. "You are tired," she said. "I am exhausted." The story was not that bad. Not the story. Bath. His hand rested beside his plate. No heroic posture. No crowd to charm. "Every invitation I accept seems to arrive with the expectation that I shall make the room brighter than I found it," he said. "After my family's mourning, people decided cheerfulness was a duty I could perform for all of us. I like giving people courage. I do. But some nights I have none to spare." Rosalind looked through the open doors. Eleanor had lowered her sewing, but politely kept her eyes on the cloth. Reginald went on. "If I stop sounding hopeful, I fear everyone will discover I am merely a man who is very tired of being encouraging." Rosalind pushed the last slice of seed cake into the middle of the table. "You need not encourage me through dessert." His mouth curved. Then he asked, "Do you ever stop making a room easier?" She could have answered with a jest. She could feel 3 of them waiting. "The night they cut my hair," she said, "I stopped for perhaps 5 minutes. His expression changed. "I wanted to make them laugh about it." She continued, "Not because it was amusing. Because if they laughed with me, I would not have to discover whether they could bear to look at me and still keep me in the room." Reginald said nothing grand enough to spoil the truth. His fingers came to rest on the table a few inches from hers. He did not close the distance. Somehow that small space felt warmer than a declaration. Rosalind looked at his hand and thought of the carriage list she had not corrected. Receiving one useful thing had not erased her. The discovery was almost offensively simple. 3 days later, at the final committee luncheon, Juliana proved that healing did not make old cruelties vanish. "How quickly your hair is returning, Miss Prescott," she said, across the table. "Though I suppose short hair must be very convenient for a working woman." 2 guests laughed. Rosalind's answer sprang up at once. Something about saving on pins, something light, something that would spare everyone the burden of choosing whether the remark had been cruel. She drew breath. Reginald stood. The scrape of his chair cut through the room. "You find this amusing, Miss Dunmore?" Rosalind's stomach dropped. His voice had the dangerous warmth she had learned to recognize, the voice he used when he believed sincerity could carry more weight than one man ought to promise. Before the final ball, he said, "I shall see every person in Bath ashamed of treating Miss Prescott as though injury were entertainment. I will make this city understand what it has done." The room went silent. Then someone applauded. One pair of hands became three. Three became most of the table. Rosalind smiled because she had no idea what else to do. That applause followed her out of the room like a chain. By afternoon, the whisper had changed. Whitmore was not merely employing her, he was championing her. Every good decision she made became proof of his favor. Every mistake would become proof that his favor had been misplaced. She answered 2 extra notes, rechecked 3 menus, took back a duty she had already given to a servant. When Eleanor told her to eat, Rosalind promised she would after one more task. The next day she placed the quartet in the music room for a rehearsal. At the exact hour, Mrs. Arbuthnot expected the same 4 musicians at a private supper. The 2 written arrangements lay side by side in her hands. For several seconds she could not understand how both had come from her. Then she laughed. It sounded wrong even to her. "I can repair it," she said when Reginald entered. "2 players here, 2 at the supper until the hour turns. We shall call it an adventurous new form of music. I can be in both places if I run quickly enough." Rosalind. "I have always wanted to discover whether I possess 2 bodies." Rosalind. The second time he said her name without grandeur. Her smile failed. He looked at the 2 arrangements. "My promise made your work carry a burden it did not have before." She swallowed. "I turned your reputation into something I meant to win," he said. "That was not mine to promise, and it made every ordinary mistake of yours answer for my words." There it was. Not forgiveness, not rescue. The injury named plainly enough that she did not have to make it funny. "What will you do?" she asked. "First, I shall speak to the musicians and Mrs. Arbuthnot. The confusion is mine to untangle today. Then, before the same committee that heard me yesterday, I shall withdraw the promise. You will look inconsistent. I was wrong consistently enough. I can survive correcting it once." Despite herself, she breathed out something close to a laugh. At the committee table that afternoon, he kept his retraction short. "I spoke yesterday as though approval were mine to command. It is not. Miss Prescott's commission stands on the work she was hired to do, and on nothing I can make society think of her. I can promise only what belongs to me. I will not make her into a public cause again." No applause followed. Rosalind preferred it that way. When they returned to the music room, Reginald asked what would make the following day workable. Rosalind folded the 2 schedules together. "Nothing from me," she said. "Tomorrow I do not wish to see 1 guest, 1 supplier, or 1 member of this committee. I want the whole day without callers." He blinked, then nodded. "Done. No emergency messages because someone dislikes the color of a ribbon." "Done. No note asking where you put the Northgate list." "I know where I put it. That is almost suspicious." The next day, Rosalind stayed at Eleanor's lodgings. The world did not collapse. Reginald conducted the meeting from the notes she had left. A maid brought 1 ordinary household message at noon and nothing else. No messenger arrived with a manufactured crisis. No ducal carriage appeared to prove how noble his restraint was. Rosalind slept until nearly 10, ate bread and apricot preserve, walked with Eleanor in the afternoon, and discovered with some irritation that rest was not a moral failure. When she returned the following evening to collect the dance arrangements, the music room doors stood open to the corridor. Reginald sat at the pianoforte bench surrounded by crumpled drafts of a speech for the final ball. He looked dreadful. The old Rosalind would have told him he looked heroic. The changed Rosalind leaned against the doorframe. You look like a man who needs to sit down, which is impressive because you are already sitting. He looked up and laughed. There you are. There I am. Did Bath survive barely? 3 ladies disagreed about the placement of an orange tree. I nearly sent for you. You would have regretted it. I know. She came farther into the room. And the speech, I hate it. That is encouraging. I keep trying to determine what words will make everyone feel better. Rosalind looked at the pages. Perhaps none. He leaned back against the pianoforte. I like being needed, Rosalind. I do not know what to do with myself when I am not. I know. He looked at her. She touched the stubble soft dark hair beginning to cover her head. I like making people laugh. I do not know what to do when a room is unhappy, and I cannot mend it in a sentence. What did you do yesterday? Ate preserves with a spoon. Scandalous. Eleanor was severe about it. From the adjoining room came Eleanor's dry voice. I was not. Rosalind laughed and pulled her dance card from her pocket. Its front remained almost entirely black. After the first night, no gentleman in Bath had been eager to write his name there. The back, by contrast, was crowded with the practical remains of 5 weeks' time's arrows, initials, a note about seed cake, and one warning never to let Lord Hastings near Mr. Crawford's carriage. She found the pencil on the music stand. What are you doing? Reginald asked. Correcting an omission. She wrote Whitmore on the first line. Then she held the card toward him. For once, Reginald had no complete sentence ready. He rose and bowed. Rosalind put her hand in his. They had only the empty music room, the open doors, Eleanor within hearing, and a distant violinist practicing scales elsewhere in the house. It was enough. Rosalind led the first turn. You are counting incorrectly, she said. I am distracted. By the music, no. His hand at her waist was careful and warm. Her newly growing hair made her feel oddly exposed without the wide straw hat she wore outdoors, but not ashamed. Not with him looking at her as though the invitation itself had mattered more than the sight of her. When the figure ended, neither moved away at once. The final ball is tomorrow, Reginald said. They will expect me to choose a bride. Rosalind's fingers tightened once around his. Then we require another rule. Your rules have become the governing force of my summer. I attend as the woman paid to arrange the evening. If the gossip turns ugly, I decide whether I remain or go, and you make no speech in my defense unless I ask for one. His instinct rose visibly. She could almost see 3 pages of noble argument forming behind his eyes. Then he exhaled. Agreed. Bath tested the agreement before the candles were lit. By the afternoon of the final picnic, Juliana had given the old rumor a new shape. The shaving people whispered had been too convenient. Perhaps Rosalind had encouraged it. Perhaps a penniless companion had discovered the most dramatic route possible to a duke's notice. Eleanor repeated the rumor in their lodging with such disgust that each word sounded dirty. Rosalind began, Yes, naturally. I have always thought losing all one's hair an economical method of... She stopped. The joke hung unfinished. Eleanor's face softened. You need not attend tonight? Rosalind looked at the dance card on the table. I do need to finish the work I accepted. For your reference, for my wages, for my reference, for myself. She met Eleanor's eyes. But when you speak of me later, I want you to speak of the work. Not of whether Bath decided I behaved respectably enough under humiliation. Eleanor was quiet for a long moment. Then she nodded. I can do that. At Whitmore House, Reginald was waiting beside the long table, where the afternoon arrangements had been laid out. A folded speech rested near his hand. I wrote this last night, he said. Rosalind eyed the thickness of it. Then I am already opposed. It argues that the rumor is cruel, senseless, and beneath the people repeating it. All true. It also has a very strong ending. I feared it might. His mouth twitched, but his hand stayed on the paper. If you tell me to use it, I will. Rosalind looked through the open doors toward the meadow. Guests were arriving. Juliana stood with two ladies near the first awning, already watching. The speech might have felt glorious. It might also make every eye turn from the work to the Duke's defense of her. "Leave it face down," Rosalind said. Reginald turned the pages over. That was all. The picnic began under a coldness no June sun could warm. Several ladies greeted Eleanor and looked past Rosalind. One gentleman asked a servant whether the Duke's young protégé had approved the seating, as if Rosalind were not 3 feet away. A supplier of ices arrived late with straw-packed tubs already weeping melt-water in the sun. One cartwheel had sunk into the soft edge of the grass. He saw Rosalind checking the game tables and walked directly to Reginald with his bill and an argument about where the cart should stand. Rosalind's old impulse was immediate run over, solve it, prove her command, make the man acknowledge her. Instead, she handed Eleanor the cards for the east tables. "Will you take these with pleasure?" Rosalind went back to the children's games. Reginald handled the supplier himself. He did not call across the lawn for Rosalind to prove who held authority. He settled the payment question that belonged to him, had 2 footmen lever the wheel free, directed the cart to the shaded gravel already marked on the plan, and returned to carrying water for the skittle lane. The event went on. A ribbon tore. A child cried after losing a hoop. Lord Hastings complained about the distance to his carriage. The pies were eaten. The games finished. The musicians began exactly when they should, and the picnic succeeded while several people still disliked Rosalind. That fact settled more deeply in her than any applause could have done. By evening, the townhouse ballroom burned with beeswax candles and reflected light from the chandeliers. Rosalind stood near the pillars checking the last arrivals. Her ivory muslin gown was plain beside the jeweled silks around her, and the soft, dark growth on her head was visible. She had left the wide outdoor hat upstairs. The orchestra tuned for the opening set. Juliana took her place among the eligible ladies. Mrs. Arbuthnot approached Reginald at the center of the floor. Conversation ebbed away. "Your Grace," she said, "will you lead the opening dance with the lady who is to end all our speculation?" Rosalind's heart struck hard against her ribs. For one treacherous second she imagined him crossing the floor, taking her hand before everyone, making every whisperer watch, while a duke chose the woman they had mocked. It would feel like triumph. Then the door would close. For the rest of her life, that public choice would follow her. The shaved companion, made respectable because Whitmore had selected her. Her work, her wages, every room she had managed, would become a prelude to that rescue. Reginald looked at the waiting ladies. Then he looked toward Rosalind. "I will not lead the opening set, Mrs. Arbuthnot." A murmur moved through the room. "And I will not use a marriage to settle gossip. Nothing more. No sermon. No denunciation. No claim." He crossed the floor toward Rosalind, while the orchestra remained silent. He stopped far enough away that she had to choose the next step herself. "The carriage, Miss Prescott?" he asked quietly. "Or the terrace?" Mrs. Arbuthnot lowered the card in her hand. A sharp breath passed through the nearest ladies. Then the crowd shifted apart, leaving the path to the terrace doors clear. The same 2 kinds of freedom he had offered on the first night, but she was not the same woman receiving them. Rosalind looked once around the ballroom. The tables were set. The carriages were ordered. The musicians knew their hour. Her commission did not require her to stand here and manage what everyone thought of her. The terrace. She walked first. Eleanor met them by the glass doors with Rosalind's wrap over one arm and the blue-ribboned bonnet in her hands. The sight of it stopped Rosalind. 5 weeks earlier she had clutched that bonnet because everyone in the ballroom wanted to know whether she would hide beneath it. Now Eleanor simply offered it. Rosalind took the bonnet and stepped outside. The summer air moved coolly over the short, new growth on her scalp. She felt it and did not reach for the bonnet. The terrace stones held the day's warmth. Beyond the balustrade, Bath lay dark beneath the summer sky. The ballroom doors closed behind them, muting the first uncertain notes of the orchestra. Reginald looked at the bonnet. His hand moved toward it exactly as it had on the first night, then stopped short of the brim. Rosalind smiled. Not to make anything easier. Not because she was required to prove that she had forgiven the world, because she wanted to. She placed the bonnet in his outstretched hand. "Hold this." His fingers closed around the pale straw and blue ribbon. "For how long?" "Just one dance." There is no orchestra. There is an orchestra. It is merely on the wrong side of a door." "That sounds like one of your arrangements. One of my better ones." She stepped toward him and offered her hand. Reginald set the bonnet carefully on the stone bench beside them and took her into the figure. The music reached them, softened by glass, more rhythm than melody. Their slippers whispered over the terrace. Gravel shifted when they strayed too far from the paving. Rosalind led the first turn. He followed. Halfway through, she laughed because he nearly missed the measure. "I knew you were counting badly. I have been accused of worse." "Yes. Long speeches." His hand steadied at her back. She could feel his breath near her temple, the warm night, the light pressure of his fingers through her glove. No one outside the doors applauded. The absence of an audience made every small thing sharper. When the figure ended, Reginald did not release her immediately. "I know what I want to ask you," he said. Rosalind's heart turned over. She looked through the glass at the bright room where everyone had spent weeks waiting for him to choose. "Ask me tomorrow." His brows lifted. "When no one is waiting for you to choose a bride." The earnestness in his face softened into a smile. "Tomorrow." The next morning, the Bathwick meadow looked much less like the site of a grand ducal event, and much more like a field after several hundred people had eaten in it. Ribbons hung crooked from hoops. One skittle lay beneath a bench. Empty baskets waited to be stacked for the hired carts. Rosalind knelt on the grass, folding leftover linen. Her wages for the commission had been counted and set aside for her. Eleanor's reference remained hers. Another lady had already asked Eleanor cautiously but sincerely whether Miss Prescott might be available to arrange an autumn supper. None of those things depended upon the answer she might give this morning. Reginald appeared carrying 5 wicker baskets at once. Rosalind watched the top one wobble. "Your Grace, I have it. You very plainly do not. I am attempting usefulness. You are attempting architecture." The top basket fell with a hollow thump. Rosalind laughed. She did not spring up to save him from looking foolish. Reginald stared at the fallen basket, then at her. "My reputation," he said gravely, "will never survive defeat by wicker. Pick it up before the witnesses arrive. There are no witnesses. Then your reputation is safe for another minute." He set the remaining baskets down and came to kneel beside her. For once, he seemed to have prepared no speech. "Is it tomorrow yet?" "Rosalind," she folded the last napkin and placed it in the basket. "It is." He looked toward the empty meadow, perhaps assuring himself that no ballroom had followed them there. "I am not asking you to become an answer to Bath," he said, "and I am not asking for a wedding before either of us has learned what we are like when there is no scandal to arrange ourselves around. That is fortunate. I dislike hurried programs. I am asking whether you will agree to an engagement that remains private until we leave Bath, and to a courtship long enough for you to change your mind without losing anything that is yours." Rosalind studied him. He had rank enough to make the world move around him. He also had, she now knew, a dangerous tendency to believe a large promise could mend a large hurt. But he had learned to withdraw one. He had carried the Northgate list without taking the whole table. He had left a speech face down because she asked. He had let a room remain disappointed. More importantly, she knew what she would keep if she said no. Her wages, Eleanor's reference, her work, her ability to leave. Yes, she said. To the engagement. Not to a wedding this year. Relief flashed across his face, followed immediately by the beginning of something eloquent. Rosalind raised one finger. If that sentence is longer than 3 lines, Your Grace, I shall charge another fee. He laughed. One season, she continued. I finish my place with Eleanor as we agreed. If she accepts another engagement in the autumn and wants me with her, I go. If someone wishes to pay me to arrange an event, I decide whether I take it. And before there is any wedding, we make proper settlements so that what I have earned does not vanish merely because my name changes. Reginald's aunt came without flourish. Rosalind narrowed her eyes. Only yes, you have complained for 5 weeks that I speak too long. I did not say I wanted a miracle. He reached for her hand, and this time she gave it before he could ask another question. When he kissed her, it was not beneath chandeliers, and no one gasped. The meadow smelled of grass and yesterday's crushed mint. Somewhere behind them, a loose skittle rolled a few inches in the breeze and knocked softly against a basket. Rosalind drew back first. Reginald looked absurdly pleased. She touched the short, dark growth on her head, then glanced at the basket he had dropped. You still have work to do. I am a duke. You are a duke who lost to Wicker. He picked up the basket. Rosalind laughed again and returned to folding the linen while he worked beside her in the ordinary daylight. No room needed saving. The end.